two leaders of the Democratic Alliance say they're going to the Human Rights Commission over the problems with water in Gauteng. As you saw earlier, Rand Water asking councils to maintain what are called Stage 2 water restrictions for an indefinite period because of the problems they've had in getting enough water to councils. At the moment, just to remind you, the Vaal Dam is 90% full. The Sterkfontein Dam, which feeds the Vaal Dam, is 99.7% full. One of the leaders who's lodged a complaint at the Human Rights Commission is Msimanga, the provincial leader for the DA in Gauteng. Solly, good afternoon to you. Why are you laying a complaint at the Human Rights Commission?
Good afternoon, Stevens, and thank you for affording us the opportunity. Water everywhere, but nothing to drink. I think that's what we're sitting with here. We're having most of our water resources in Gauteng being about 90, 92, 95, and in certain instances 100% full. Yet at the same time, we are having a serious problem with the provision of clean drinking water to communities. We have been raising these issues for a very, very long time. Stephen, in your other platform, I had spoken to you a while ago to say, at the beginning of the year, we had raised this issue with Rainwater and with the minister. And, the very next day, the media headlines were saying, the Rainwater takes also in Msimanga. Here we are, a couple of months later, we're having municipalities that in certain parts of those municipalities, they are not able to provide water. You look at Vaal as an example. There's been areas in Mansfield and the surrounding. There's been areas in Johannesburg. There's been areas in Ekurhuleni that has been without water for over a month. And this is not because of the municipality's inability to provide water, but this has to do with the ongoing ability of Rainwater to pump water out of Aikenhof and the surrounding stations to the reservoirs that are in these municipalities, and from these municipalities going them to the residents. And this is something that we have been saying for a very, very long time is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. And today we decided that the most basic of human rights, and that is the provision of water or access to water, is being denied to the residents of Gauteng. And this is going to be a bigger problem. And this is why we decided that, we've written to the presidency, we've written to the premier, we've written to the minister, we've written to the CEO and the board of both, Rainwater and Eskom, but we're not getting answers in terms of what is being done. So, this is why we took the step that we took today.
So are you lodging a complaint about Rand Water at the Human Rights Commission? You're saying that Rand Water is the problem?
We are looking at the whole stakeholder engagement. We are saying that this must be investigated because at this point in time, Stevens, you have one pointing the finger at the other instead of coming together and saying this is where the problem is. But Rainwater must be the source at which we start. The minister must come in account. The board must come in account. And also over and above that, the presidency must also come and say what are they doing to make sure that there's intergovernmental relations or task team that is looking into this matter from a national, a provincial and a local level, and also the two entities that are also involved.
Okay, Rand Water has said the problems were created by a combination of two things. The one is stage 6 load shedding that obviously affected pumps in the reservoirs, and then of course the long heat spell. So what that meant was that in the north of the country you had a very long heat wave. People used a lot more water. The reservoirs fell below a certain level, and then they couldn't pump enough water to keep the reservoirs full. If that's the problem, can you really blame them?
Well, we have been saying, Stevens, and I've met with the CEO of Rainwater, and I've said that they must work with us to put pressure onto the minister. At the time, it was Minister Gordon, to then say, are we able to then begin to then insulate, areas that have these pump stations, so that they don't get to be affected by load shedding. Because it's a critical thing, Stevens. So you have water in lying areas that needs pressure in order to keep water supplying on the other side to the residents. If you are then going to have the reduction in the pressure in those reservoirs, it means that at the same time you're not going to be able to then pump water. And then what we have been saying is that once you have less water in those reservoirs, there's less pressure. That means that the higher lying areas are not going to be able to then get water. Therefore, you need to have continuous pumping of water flowing into these areas. And this is something that we have been saying to them. We need to work around this and make sure that those areas are not affected. Go to an area like Ficksburg in Johannesburg, on the western part of Johannesburg. go and look at the surrounding areas around Ficksburg and those, you realize that if you don't take a shower at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, the rest of the day you're not going to be able to shower because you're not going to get water. Why? Because they're not able to then pump water out of Aikenhof into those reservoirs that are localized reservoirs and then to the residents. And this is why we are saying, unless a time that comes where we all sit around the table and have a task team that is able to look at this holistically and say, these are the factors that are contributing to this, we're not going to find a solution. But to point at residents and say because residents are now using a lot of water and that is the problem, I think that is absolutely not true. And the fact of the matter is rainwater has also been sitting with a license that is very much outdated. The minister has now have to approve that the municipalities or the rainwater can pump much more water than they have been able to pump in order to meet the growing demand. Gauteng has grown exponentially in the last couple of years, but that hasn't been the case in terms of their license to pump more water.
Right. So, Solly, I understand why you're doing this. You say you're doing it on behalf of residents. You're making a political point. But you'll also remember, I'm sure, the situation in Hammanskraal, where people went to the Human Rights Commission about the water in Hammanskraal. It was the DA administration in Tshwane that had to take responsibility for that. Can you really complain about water in Gauteng when your administration in Tshwane failed to provide proper water in Hammanskraal?
Oh yes, we can complain. I was actually at the forefront of promising the people of Hammanskraal clean drinking water. We went and established a team that looked at the feasibility study of turning the Hammanskraal purification plant, actually even starting from Vaal all the way up to Temba. We had actually gone out on tender, and that was stopped by the minister. It's on record that was stopped by the minister. It was not the municipality that had stopped it. And why? Because nobody, Nomvula Mkoyane realized, and as a minister, realized that they were not going to benefit out of the contracts that were going to be awarded there. We were talking about close to 2.6 billion rand in order to do a 10T. From the Vaal, from increasing the capacity of Vaal in terms of the cleaning of that water to 80 megaliters from the 40 or 50 megaliters that is currently there, and also the cleaning downstream of the Temba reservoir and the Temba treatment plant. So we had done quite a lot. But unfortunately, at that point in time, a problem that we inherited and we were starting to work on to fix and became a political football. So I can tell you now with certainty that we have every right, to talk about the issue of water around Gauteng, because we don't sit around and say there's nothing that we can do. There's much that we have done.
Msimanga, thank you. The provincial leader for the Democratic Alliance in Gauteng.